Good evening and welcome back to the Transition series. This is the first series of the school year. We take a break over the summer and also over the holiday months, November and December. I asked Anna to present on tonight's topic, and it gets into talking about the transitions over the lifespan. One of the materials that I shared tonight is it's a map. It's a transition map, and it talks about where do we go from here. Transitions can be very, very, very different from birth all the way into adulthood. But for now, I'd like to introduce Donna Davidson. She's with the Down Syndrome Network, and she can provide some good historical information about the transition series.
Yeah, so welcome to new folks, a little bit of history. This idea of information meetings started before I got involved, actually. So when my son was probably about 12 or 14, a group of parents whose children were in the school district decided that they weren't finding out the information that they needed for adulthood. And at that point, I don't know if the ASAC program existed, but the parents got together once a month in the school district. So perhaps the ASAC program was in its formative years then, because we were allowed to use school district property at what's now the King Career Center. And we met once a month. It was called PIT, Parents in Transition. So not students in transition, but parents in transition, because we were really feeling confused and what happens next? What do we do? I can remember when did get to the point of leaving the school district, it felt like falling over a cliff. And so a few years before that, there was kind of that sense of something's coming that I need to be prepared for, but I don't know what to do. And they brought in speakers, different speakers, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and so forth, and just rotated over and over and over again. But after a few years, they lost access to the school district rooms, and we were no longer allowed to be in the schools. And so it disintegrated at that point. And I have been involved with the Alaska Down Syndrome Network since its beginning. I helped start it. I was at that point getting a lot of calls from folks. What do I do? What do I do? And they decided we needed to start up this group again. And the Down Syndrome Network had it for a couple of years. And we asked then Stone Soup Group to join us. And we were able, with their support, actually do webinars rather than just in-person visits at some location. So we had a much wider reach. We were trying to reach statewide. And then, of course, COVID hit. That changed everything. So we were able then to start Zoom, and we have done Zoom meetings since then and broadened our scope of folks that we have come and speak to us. But I think it's very helpful, the information we get for parents whose children are getting closer to leaving the school district.
Thank you, Donna. Well, I am going to pass it on to Anna. Anna facilitates a lot of trainings that we offer here at Stone Soup Group. She's a great presenter. We should call you our master trainer, Anna. Maybe that could be your new title, along with parent navigator and the map coordinator. But take it away, Anna.
Okay, well, welcome to our presentation tonight about exploring the roadmap of transitions in the life of a child with disabilities. My name, of course, is Anna Zerfas, and I'm a parent navigator and program coordinator for Stone Soup Group. If you have any questions during the training, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, or put it in the chat box if that is more comfortable for you. So this map is going to be our guide for today's presentation. We will be touching briefly on some of the priorities in the areas of infancy to preschool, elementary school, adolescence, young adulthood, and beyond. We will also be including resources for these stages to help you get along the road. So from the time a child is born, there are a number of things to think about and do if your child has a disability or you suspect there may be a delay. Some of the priorities for this area are the developmental screenings. That is a very big one. Infant learning if needed, private therapies, Medicaid and TEFRA eligibility, and SPED preschool. So one of the easiest places to start for a new parent or caregiver is with the milestone development tools like the one at the CDC website or the ASQ tool at the Help Me Grow Alaska website. These tools can give you a better picture of where the child is at in their development, so you know what, if any, next steps you should take. If your child has not had a recent hearing or vision screening, this is something we always suggest to see if there are things that can be immediately addressed. Talk with the pediatrician or the doctor about concerns, and don't let them put you off. Get the referrals for services that you need so that you can get those early supports for your child. So, of course, after getting those referrals, the next place to look for help would be that early intervention or infant learning program. So these programs are federally funded to support these kiddos with disabilities so they can get that early intervention, which can lead to better outcomes on this road. They do provide things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and even that really important transition to special education preschool. One of the things to know about infant learning and early intervention programs is they work on a family model. So they try and help you do things with your kiddo so that you can continue doing those even when they're not there. You can also get referrals from your doctor to private therapies as well as ABA, which is the applied behavior analysis. Unfortunately, as we all know, there are wait lists for almost everything in Alaska. So make sure you get on those lists as soon as possible and make sure that you keep calling them every month to see where you're at, because the squeaky wheel really can get you in faster. Now, if your child is in an early intervention program, the early intervention program is required to help with the special education preschool transition process. So this slide gives you the timelines for what needs to happen and with who to get your child placed in a special education preschool in your local district. So depending on when you entered the program, the planning for this transition can begin around the age of 24 to 30 months. They do need to notify the eligible children, basically the parent and the school district. Then there's the formal referral to the school district with the transition conference. Next, they implement whatever activities might be on that transition plan. And this can be things like those assessments the school district wants done, any medical reports that need to be reviewed, and of course, the consent paperwork that parents need to sign. The next step includes the big meeting where everyone comes together to go through and talk about the results on the ESER, work on the IEP, and talk about where the placement will be, because it won't necessarily be at your neighborhood school. It just depends on where the program is that your child needs. Finally, at the age of 3 years, they implement the IEP that has come from all of this hard work. And let's see, what is ESER? Okay, so that is the eligibility summary and evaluation report. That is where they bring all of those assessments that they've done, any medical records that they received. It's all in one document, and then they use that document to jump off of to go and create the IEP. Now, of course, What happens if your child is over the age of 3 when you find out or suspect that they have a disability? There's actually a process to get your child in a special education preschool for that situation as well. This is called Child Find. It is in Section 300 of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or commonly called IDEA. It is a legal rule that requires districts to identify and evaluate all children who may have disabilities, regardless of the severity. It also requires the districts to identify children with disabilities, even if the neighborhood school does not offer special education services. And this can be things like charter schools, magnet schools. So even if their neighborhood school does not offer special education services, the district itself still has this law to contend with. The process includes screening, formal evaluation, notifying caregivers or parents of the suspected disability, providing information on the law of Child Find, and offering those evaluations and resources to support the child. Now, around the state, different districts have different ways of advertising Child Find. They could put posters up in the local stores, post it on their websites, send it home in newsletters, put it in the newspaper, or basically any combination. There are lots of different ways that they can reach parents that they are required to do. So getting into the process a little deeper, we have the annual public notice. So they have to do it at least annually, but most districts that I know of have an entire web page dedicated to it. And then they will do the notices if they're like going to be in your area and doing a Child Find. During the Child Find clinic, they'll do a screener that looks at the child's skills. What a lot of parents don't understand about this screening process is that the child has to be 2 standard deviations away from average, whether above or below, in order to qualify for a referral for evaluation. This can be especially frustrating for parents whose child is delayed, but not that delayed. That was my child. He just didn't quite meet it. So we had to pay for private everything. The screeners generally will look at things like their general health, their vision and hearing, if they haven't already had that done, basic development and skills, their language in their culture, and any self-care skills that they might need to know or should know, and what that looks like from the parent. Of course, everything that you need for a kiddo with disabilities comes with a cost, and that are several insurance programs that can help with that. One of them is called TEFRA. This is the Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act. That's why they call it TEFRA. It is a Medicaid program specifically designed for children who have disabilities or significant medical needs. It only provides regular Medicaid coverage, and that's an important thing to note. None of those extra things like rehabilitation, supported living, supported employment, or respite are included in TEFRA. It does not take into account a parent's income. So you can make more than the state Medicaid income limits and still have your child get covered. The process is a lot of paperwork and stress, and families report that usually, unfortunately, you're denied the first time. So make sure you appeal, because that is when a lot of parents push through and get their child deemed eligible for the program. Now, in Alaska, we also have Medicaid waivers. There are 3 waivers for kiddos with developmental and/or complex special needs in Alaska. These include the individuals with developmental disabilities, the IDD waiver, the Individualized Supports Waiver, which is the ISW waiver, and the Children with Complex Medical Conditions waiver. These give home and community-based services to children that need a nursing level of care. They do include all of those extra services that TEFRA does not. Access to the paperwork for the IDD and ISW waivers is through DDRC navigators. There are 11 agencies in the state of Alaska that have these navigators, Stone Soup being one of them. Then through care coordinators, you can get access to the CCMC paperwork. While these agencies provide assistance in applying, they do not make the eligibility decisions. That happens at the state level. So your kiddo is now grown up a little. They're no longer your baby. This means that you're going to have more evaluations and assessments that will be updated if they have already had them from when they were in earlier intervention, or new ones for kiddos that were not. This will include an updated ESER and IEP. The team will also look at the possibility for extended school year support as well. So talking about assessments, what's all this stuff? It's a big thing because there are different kinds and there's lots of them. There are school-based ones and there are medical assessments. The school is not required to accept medical evaluation results, much to parents' frustration, but they do have to consider them when doing their own assessments or in deciding which supports children get in their IEPs. Formal evaluations by the school district can be in the following areas and are listed on the consent for evaluation form that a parent receives in order to do the evaluations. These are the school-based assessments. They'll be in educational or academic, motor and sensory, vision and hearing, adaptive, cognitive, communication, behavioral, social and emotional, and vocational if they're older. A lot of times the school will try and get away with evaluating the smallest number of areas as possible. So make sure that you request as many areas as possible, because they're not going to find out the right supports needed for your child if they don't have the entire picture. Now, what happens if your kiddo did not get identified for early intervention or after 3 years old as part of Child Find? So Child Find law continues up to the age of 22. So your child can still be identified in their school through this process, which can be initiated by either an educator coming to a parent and saying, I think we need to do this, or do a referral, or a parent can say, hey, something's wrong, we need to do this, which then of course leads us to the process. So while every district is different, this graphic represents a general process from the initial identification all the way through the 3-year reevaluation assessment. Kiddos can have other interventions, sometimes called RTI or MSST. These are typically strategies to improve deficits that are done without the special education process, before it, or during it. So the process starts at the identification and recognition stage, knowing, getting that referral done, or getting, knowing that there's a problem. And then we move into the pre-referral. This is usually when they start doing some of those interventions that are not formal. They can and should, I had a question come up the other day, should make that referral even while they're doing the interventions, because there's no guarantee those interventions are going to be helpful. So they need to do that referral to the special education department so they can get that started. Then you go into the referral, you get all the consent to evaluate and all that done. Then you go into the evaluation phase. And that can cover a lot of different areas depending on what needs to be done and who needs to participate in those assessments. Then you get into eligibility. And this is a big one because a lot of people don't realize that, yes, your child can go through all of these assessments and discover there is a learning disability, but it's not quite bad enough for them to be determined eligible. So that is one thing that can come into play at the eligibility stage. Just because your child has a disability doesn't mean they're going to be eligible for special education. Then you go through, you do the IEP with the entire team. You come and figure out what all the assessments said. You put together an IEP with goals that can be met and observed through data, where they're going to be placed in order to get those services, and how much of their time is going to be spent outside of the regular education classroom. Now, the IEP has to be updated at least annually. It can be updated more often, but that is the basic requirement. And then it does need to have more assessments or recent test data every 3 years for a reevaluation. That is actually the period when a child can be exited from special education. So that's something important to note. So I love this graphic. It's fantastic because it really shows the differences between an IEP and a 504 plan, which is, that plan that maybe the kiddo who doesn't quite qualify for special education can have to help them access their education. So depending on your child's level of support needed, you could have one or the other. Some of the key things to remember when it comes to the differences is that for an IEP, you must be eligible for one of those disability categories. It must provide specially designed instruction for your kiddo. It must have achievable goals and progress monitoring. The school is required to have those parents in meetings and decisions. All schools must make this available to eligible students while receiving funding for the students. Now, the 504 plan, on the other hand, can be any disability, and it focuses on how the child learns. So most of the 504 plan is accommodations for a student to access their curriculum. So it's not individualized. It's not modified in any way. They just need something extra to help them access their education. So maybe that's assistive technology. Maybe that's a certain pencil grip. Maybe that is the teacher coming and hip checking their desk to make sure they're paying attention. It could be as simple or complex as needed so that the kiddo can access their curriculum. It is not a special education program, and it is overseen by a different law and department in the federal government. The IEP is overseen by the Department of Education, and the 504s are overseen by the Office of Civil Rights. The school does not typically have to seek parental input, but most of them do. They try. And schools also receive no funding for 504 plans. So that is something a lot of parents don't realize. I didn't when my son was going through it. I had to learn as well. Now we move into extended school year. So sometimes people call this summer school, but it's not. It's actually more than that. Extended school year, or ESY, there's so many acronyms. Can be confusing for a lot of parents. This program is specifically for special education and related services. So like OT, PT, speech, that are provided to a kiddo with a disability beyond the normal school year. It has to be included in the child's IEP, and it is no cost to the parents of the child, something that's very, very important when parents are trying to figure out what they're doing. Now, historically, school districts have looked at ESY as an ability to make sure that a child does not lose so much progress during the summer that it makes it harder for them to catch up in the fall. It is also used to make up lost time. Maybe they didn't have enough staff, and so they're making it up in those weeks after the school year ends in ESY. Or maybe they have come to the determination that free appropriate public education, or FAPE, was not provided during the year, and they have to make that up. The decision to include ESY for a child typically takes place after the winter and spring breaks. So please ask your child's teacher if you think you would like to talk about this program and have your child in it. So once again, your child has grown and is now entering the wonderful and wacky world that is adolescence. One of the top priorities in this phase of life is making sure everything is in place for the future. This includes more updated assessments and formal transition planning that is in the IEP. Now, if that 3-year cycle of reevaluation of those updated IEP assessments does not happen within the senior year, make sure to request a new one. And the reason why is because you need it for transition planning. It needs to include those transition interest inventories, and you need an updated one within the last 3 years if your child is going on to any post-secondary education and are in need of accommodations for a disability. And that includes vocational and residential education. You want to have that updated assessment, both school and medical, if you can, for those purposes. Now, when we talk about secondary transition, there's lots of parts and pieces. It must start in the IEP year that the teen turns 16. However, if your child is more impacted, a parent can request it start much earlier. I've seen them start as early as 10. Now, one thing that's very important to realize is transfer of rights. Letters from the school district must go to the parent and student by the 17th birthday because all educational rights transfer to the student on their 18th birthday unless there is some form of guardianship in place. And that's really important, especially if you have a kiddo who turns 18 during the school year. So one thing to keep in mind, prior to that 16-year-old IEP meeting, transition assessments should take place that are age appropriate and based on the child's needs, desires, wants, and preferences. And that it can be really tough for some parents because they're looking kind of as aspirations, what they want their kiddos, how they want things to look for their kiddos. But even kiddos who are maybe cognitively impacted or nonverbal can have a say in what they want or need in their life. So I love graphics, if you haven't already guessed. And this graphic outlines the secondary transition process from the assessments all the way to their summary of performance when they exit high school. One of the things that is not stressed enough is that this planning is based on the teen's interests, needs, and strengths. So even that nonverbal child with cognitive impacts has those favorite things. They have favorite hobbies or activities they like to do. Taking all of those into account and being creative can help them feel more part of the process and confident in what is happening. So they do the assessments. They take all of their interests, needs, preferences, strengths into account. They look at their present levels of achievement and performance so that they can that kind of informs what they're doing for the IEP. They set those measurable post-secondary goals. They talk about education, training, employment, what does independent living look like? And then they set those goals so that they can achieve those things once they're outside of the high school environment. Then they plan on what they're going to study. Do they have to take certain classes? Do they have to do certain things in order to get where they want to go? Then they do the instruction, the classes, they do related services if they need to. They do community experiences, like internships or something on work study. And then they do the activities. It could be getting your driver's license. It could be filling out paperwork for applications, linking up with agencies. So linking up with Stone Soup Group, linking up with Department of Voc Rehab. All of those can be really, really important. So one of the items on the formal transition plan in Alaska is actually independent agency involvement. Parents and educators even often don't realize that they can invite other people to the table, as can the school, with permission. So these can include therapy providers. Therapy providers can go to these meetings. Stone Soup Group, I've been called into a number of these meetings. Tribal representatives in Alaska, really, really important. Care coordinators. So if you've had a care coordinator for the last 10 years, this care coordinator probably knows this kid pretty well. So they're going to be able to be another voice for that kiddo, especially at this important time. And then Department of Voc Rehab. Voc Rehab is just amazing. Here in Alaska, we have some really dedicated professionals who are doing their very best to help kiddos get into the workforce if they want to be in the workforce. And to help out with some of that, we have in-school pre-employment resources. So DBR has this set of opportunities, and most people just call them the pre-ETS program, pre-ETS. And so they have different things that can happen in the school. Now, the school does have to take some responsibility for these. So the DVR will help get them set up and running, and then will help facilitate, but the school has to make sure the teacher will help, make sure that the students are there, make sure that everything is happening. One of the things that's really cool is that the Picture Your Future, Exploring Your Transition Goals, this is an actual tool. It's an interest inventory. It's paper and pencil or digital. So you could actually read it to a nonverbal child who has cognitive impacts at their age appropriate level and get what they are looking for, so that, you know, if they're using an AAC device or if they're using some other way to communicate, they can let you know what they want. This was made in Alaska for Alaskan kiddos by Jim Creechman, who is a DVR counselor here in Alaska. Then, of course, we have applications. This priority is one that is heavy on the paperwork side, of course. So the Medicaid waiver, which we talked about earlier, when a kiddo turns 16 years old, there are extra areas in which they can be assessed that may make them eligible for the Medicaid waiver where they weren't eligible before. So when they're under 16 years old, they have to qualify in 3 of 5 areas. When they turn 16 years old, they have to qualify in 3 of 7 areas. And so looking at that once a child turns 16 can be really important. If they haven't already, sometimes you're able to apply for SSI or SSDI really early, depending on your income. But when it gets closer to the time that they're turning 18, you're going to want to do that, because once they turn 18, even if you have a guardianship, their income will be next to nothing. And so they will be eligible for that part. But doing that paperwork right the first time is incredibly hard and incredibly important. And also, like TEFRA, it doesn't always go through the first time, you get denied, but a lot of times if you push through an appeal, you'll get it determined that they'll be eligible. Now, of course, there are those kiddos who went through school just not quite delayed enough, but they're for an IEP, but they do have those 504 plans, and they do want to go to college or vocational or something like that. So helping get them applications, helping them understand the process and how it works, making sure they understand the tech involved, because sometimes, especially now, a lot of this application stuff is moved online. And so understanding how to do that, when to do it, the deadlines, making sure that there's, the procrastination isn't getting in the way, because that can be emotional as well. And then, of course, doing long-term service applications and making sure that you're getting those agencies lined up. So if you want to have your kiddo with in rehabilitation, or if you want to have him in supported living or supported employment, getting some of those long-term service applications done and making sure that they have direct service providers that can help your kiddo is really important at this stage. Then as we move into young adulthood, some of our teens may still be in a school setting because they are eligible to be in school until their 22nd birthday. Remembering these items on the appropriate timetable can save you a lot of hassle down the road. Now we're going to jump into the rabbit hole that is guardianship. So, what powers does a guardian have? They have the power to decide where the ward will live. They must make sure that the person is provided with food, clothing, hygiene, all of that stuff, transportation, social, and recreational opportunities. They have to make sure that they receive health care, and that includes mental health care, which is very important, especially now. They must make sure that the ward's personal, civil, and human rights are protected. And if for some reason any of those rights are impacted, they are the ones that will go to bat and sue on their behalf. They are responsible for managing the ward's money and property. They must apply for any benefits to which the ward is entitled. Now, we have some exclusions to all of those powers. So what powers does a guardian not have? They cannot consent on behalf of the ward to terminate the ward's parental rights. So let's say that the person that you have guardianship over has a child. You may not believe them fit to be a parent, but you cannot consent on behalf of the ward to terminate their parental rights. You cannot prohibit the ward from registering to vote or from casting a ballot at an election. You cannot prohibit the ward from applying for or obtaining a learner's permit or driver's license, even if you don't believe they should be able to do it. You cannot prohibit the ward from marrying or divorcing. And a lot of people are very surprised by that one. And they're even more surprised by the next one. You cannot prohibit sexual relations. Everyone has their sexual identity and what they believe in, what they want, and that includes people with disabilities. There are 4 different kinds of guardianship, not true guardianship, but guardianship when it comes to a person with disabilities. So guardian is a person that the court appoints to manage the affairs of another person, which we call the ward. The guardian has the authority to make all those personal decisions for the ward, like we talked about. And the guardian can manage the finances of the ward if the court has not appointed a separate conservator. So the conservator is the next one. And this is a person the court appoints to manage the financial affairs of another person, called the protected person. So the conservator manages the protected person's money and property and pays the debts and bills. These 2 kinds must go through the court process, and there are different levels of guardianship in Alaska, which include full, temporary, partial, limited, and testamentary. Full guardianship is the last resort when all other methods of protecting the person have failed, and you will have to prove it if you want to go to court for it. Now, these ones do not have to go through the court process and can be updated or revoked at any time. A durable power of attorney provides just enough legal authority to meet that person's needs in restricted areas. So it could be healthcare, it could be financial if you don't want to do a conservatorship, it could be medical, anything, stuff like that. With a durable power of attorney, an individual is designating another person to handle decisions if he or she cannot do so, or no longer wants to, or just doesn't feel like they can. Now, an SDMA is a supported decision-making agreement. These are becoming much more popular because they're very person-centered, person-directed, which is really important for a person with disabilities. They are written agreements that give people the help they need to make choices about their lives. So let's say I want to pick this person for finances, this person for housing, this person for medical, this person for recreational, and then we are a team, and the team helps the person who has disabilities understand all of their choices and what is in their best interest. But it does not give you the right to put that into place. It just informs the person with a disability so that they can make a good decision. Now, they can find ways for you to try out different choices, so you don't even have to stick with the choices you want. Supporters can also remind you of those important dates and come with you to those meetings or appointments, especially medical appointments. I've seen SDMAs really, really helpful in medical appointments because a lot of times you go to the doctor and the doctor's talking doctor speak. And so it doesn't always make sense even to someone who's neurotypical. So of course, having that help at those meetings can be really useful. Now, the process for a full guardianship is outlined here, and it has links to all of the paperwork, which include the file the petition packet and pay the fees. And then within 90 days, the court visitor does an evaluation. And then within 10 days, the petitioner can respond if wanted or needed. And then within 120 days of the filing, the court must have a scheduled hearing unless it's postponed for cause. At the hearing, the judge reviews everything that's been submitted, and that can include evaluations, assessments, visit reports, ask if there's any opposition, and determine if this is the least restrictive option before making the final decision. So that least restrictive comes into play both in the school and in the courts.
When does the guardianship process typically begin?
That is actually, I typically suggest that parents start filling out the paperwork around 9 months or so before the teen's 18th birthday and file 4 to 6 months before the birthday, because the court has 120 days of the filing, after the filing, to get their stuff done. But you can't file it so far in advance of the 18th birthday that it happens before the 18th birthday. So it kind of sits like right there. So it is definitely something to watch and make sure that you have gotten started on early. There is a process. There's classes you have to take. There's a financial system if you want to be a financial guardian. There's all of the paperwork and stuff that needs to happen. You can do it yourself and pay the filing fees. There are also lawyers here in Alaska that can help with this process as well. So if your kiddo has learning disabilities and is looking to go to vocational or college, depending on what they want to do after high school, it is really important to get the disability services in place. So most colleges and universities, even community colleges, have a disability services office. And if a child is going to apply at a college or university or vocational school or residential or something like that, they should also make sure to apply at the disability services office. Now, what happens is when they fill out all that information and they get approved for services, it's not set up like an IEP. It doesn't have goals or that kind of information. It does have all of the accommodations, including assistive technology your student might need in order to access their curriculum. It typically includes everything a 504 plan would have, with no curriculum modification. Now, a big part of planning for your child's future is how to make sure they get and keep services financially. These are two of the big tools to use when it comes to money and your kiddo. So we have a special needs trust versus an ABLE account. Those are two things that are pretty big when it comes to what can be done financially for your kiddo to help them kind of last, And so we have the special needs trust. It can cost a lot of money to set up. It can be, you have to hire a lawyer. So that's one thing to consider. The earnings are taxed. The uses are broader, so that is helpful. Account ownership is owned by a family member, not the beneficiary. The ease of accessing the funds is more of a long-term investment, so it's a little bit harder. Now, remaining balances go to estate or probate, and so there's no age eligibility, so that's something that's important. For the ABLE account, it's relatively inexpensive to set up. Here in Alaska, it's really easy. You go to the ABLE account page and you just click, get it all done. It does grow tax deferred. Distributions are tax-free for approved expenses, but do get taxed if they're not approved. Now, one of the big things that's important about these two financial mechanisms is that they're means tested. So it has no effect on means tested benefits. So if you're getting a Medicaid waiver, if you're getting supported employment, all of that Social Security, you can put money in this account and it will not count against those income guidelines. So that's really important. The funds must be used for a qualified disability. They are set up and owned by the beneficiary of the account. They can provide frequent disbursements. So, if you need stuff every month, that can happen. Now, the big part about the ABLE account is upon the death of the beneficiary, any funds remaining in the ABLE account may have to go back to pay back Medicaid if you have received or been on Medicaid during your life. And the age eligibility is, so this is something we're hopeful will change. Right now, it's set that individuals have to have those significant disabilities by age 26. There is a bill in Congress that they're working on to try and get that age limit moved up like 20 years, because there's a lot of people, so say they have a traumatic brain injury or they have some other disability, that happens in adulthood. So they are working on that. Whether or not it'll pass the session, we don't know, but that's something we're looking forward to as well. Now, you've spent almost 2 decades at this point advocating for your child. You have sat through the meetings, filled out the paperwork, gone to the therapy and doctor appointments. Now we're moving on and setting them up for stability for beyond their school life. So what happens if your kiddo wants to work, but they need services like supported living or day hab? We just talked about 2 of the mechanisms, which are also on here, that can help put some of that extra money away. Another way, but how much money? How much money do you need to make sure that goes into that account so it doesn't cut off your services? So 2 of the things that we have here in Alaska is WIPA. It's Work Incentive Planning and Assistance. Is run through the University of Alaska Anchorage, and they help beneficiaries know how much they can work without losing those state and federal benefits. And then DB 101 is also a place for resources on spending and earning for people with disabilities. One of the cool features they have on their website is like calculators. So you can actually input how many hours, how much you make, and figure out what your level is. Now, the other thing too, and so this isn't necessarily for people with disabilities, but I've actually heard of a lot of my families talk about this. And so that's why I added it to this presentation. If you've ever heard of green light banking, it's not specifically for people with disabilities, but basically what it is it's a debit card that you can actually set limits on. And so it can act kind of as a financial independence item for people with disabilities, and it helps them be accountable because you can say, okay, so how much did you take out of the ATM today? Or how much did you spend today? And help them understand the value of the money and what they're spending it on. Now, Alaska is an employment first state. This means that participation by people with disabilities in the general labor force is the first and preferred option. So to this end, handbooks have been developed to help in this goal for individuals with disabilities. They are comprehensive guides for everything from transition planning to a person running their own business. I know a person that has a disability who are here in Fairbanks. She actually got a micro enterprise loan, and she started really small, just with an egg business. And she raised chickens, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now she has a booth at the farmer's market every week. And she does health and wellness items. She does chicken, she does paintings, she does all kinds of stuff. So those micro enterprise loans can be really fantastic to get someone started on something they truly enjoy doing and may not have ever seen their life going that way, but it works out wonderfully. Both of the titles on this page are linked in the titles so that you can actually dive into the digital copies and explore them and use them. And the empowerment through employment guide is actually newer. And the pathways one has been updated recently, but the empowerment through employment offers some other tools that maybe the pathway doesn't. So like assistive technology for employment and some of those other things. Whereas the pathways has everything from, what does transition planning look like for your young adult to talking about, okay, so we have this residential school in Alaska, we have this vocational school in Alaska, we have this and this, here are the programs, here's where and how to apply for SSI or SSDI. So it talks about all of that stuff. It is 79 pages. I read every single one of them, and it took me a while to digest all of it because it was so densely packed. It's a fantastic resource to use for any kiddo that not just a kiddo with disabilities. Now we have housing. What does housing look like for your young adult? Are they going to stay in the family home with supports? Is it just going to be you and your family doing the supports, or are you going to be getting agencies and direct service professionals? Is your young adult going to eventually be able to live in a group home or independently with support? Are they going to a dorm or a residential education program? All of these are important things to think about as you walk this road and look towards the future. So when will it happen? Where and how? All of these are important questions to ask so you can find those agencies or supports to help it happen. And I was talking to someone else, and we were talking about how the secondary transition path can be much longer than we think about. So we think about a neurotypical kid, okay? They turn 18, they graduate high school, they go on to apprenticeship or college or whatever. They're like, well, that's independent. And we were talking about it and like, is that really independent though? Is the parent doing laundry for them on the weekends? Is the parent paying for anything? Is the kiddo coming and is the kiddo living at home during school? So a kiddo, even a neurotypical kiddo, isn't wholly, usually independent of their parents until their early 20s. And so why would we expect our kiddos with disabilities to be independent at that time if we're not expecting it of neurotypical kids? So the transition period for a kiddo with disabilities can actually be much longer. So a kiddo that's neurotypical, their brain doesn't actually fully form until their mid-20s. So what's to say that we can't actually push out the secondary transition process for kiddos with disabilities? Maybe they can't live in a group home at 23, but maybe they can at 27. So what does that look like? How do we get them there? And that whole process, all of those questions we ask ourselves, this can set your child up and get them off to their own lane, not necessarily off of your road, but in their own lane, and give them the journey where they can find joy. So thank you so much. I went way faster than I had anticipated. And so we got through it a little faster than I expected. Are there any questions, or is there any information you would like me to expand on?
Well, just most recently with that housing piece, where are the best resources for people to learn more about housing for their kiddos when it is that they're becoming young adults?
So the first place is if they are on a waiver of any kind, the care coordinator will be the first person to talk to. Then ironically, it's so funny. I was talking to someone about this the other day, is Alaska 211 actually has some fantastic resources, especially if your kiddo is in that unfortunate place where they don't qualify for the waiver and they need maybe low income assisted housing, that kind of stuff. So you can find places there as well. So that's definitely two of them. And Alaska Housing Finance Corporation does have like the rent vouchers and stuff like that for low income. So that might be something as well.
You mentioned care coordinators, and I do get a lot of questions. How do I find a care coordinator? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, actually, the state, I don't know when they started doing it, but they are doing it now. Every year, they publish a list of providers that do everything from respite to care coordinators to supported living, supported employment, all of the providers that are Medicaid eligible. And so if you're looking for a care coordinator that like say does TEFRA, this list actually has all of the care coordinators that do TEFRA in your area in this one list.
Where do people find this magical list?
Yeah.
It's really easy to find. I can actually send you the link. I'll in the follow-up email. But yeah, it's part of the Department of Health. Yeah, now that they split into two, I have to remember it's the Department of Health who publishes it. And they have had it for the last 2 years that I know of, that I've been using it.
We will look for your specific list of resources. That's going to be really helpful for me.
Definitely. Any other questions or areas that I can talk more about?
I'm just soaking everything up at this point in time. I'm not in Alaska. I'm in Colorado, but I want to be providing services to children in Alaska and families in Alaska via teletherapy. And so I'm just trying to figure out what y'all's everything is like, because I know that this is even a challenge for me understanding it in Colorado, much less another state that I'm not even in.
Yep.
So any information and any links that you can send and everything, I will soak it all up, put it into some wonderful resource for myself to look at later.
Yep. Nope, I totally get it. And, the really important thing, if you're looking to do telehealth speech therapy services, is if you can become an Alaska Medicaid provider, you would be able to reach those kids out in the bush who don't have access to therapists in their specific communities. And that is so needed up here.
I have been working for a couple of months trying to get through with Medicaid in Alaska. I'm calling back every week at this point in time, but I know it'll come through soon enough. I believe it.
Yep. It is a big process. I've heard other providers talk about it, and it is a process. But once it's done, then it's just the annual stuff, which is much easier.
I'm very much looking forward to being able to help kiddos across the state, because I know I've heard about the wait lists. I know that there are a lot of kids everywhere throughout the state who are going without services. And so I'm very eager to get set up with Medicaid and be able to help those kids. But thank you for all of the information today, because I'm just learning about everything. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So Donna, did you want to say something else?
Well, are we supposed to go until 8, or are we supposed to be done at 7:30? I've forgotten.
No, we have time until 8.
Okay. Just wondering if you would like to brainstorm or give me some thoughts on our situation. My son has supported employment, and it occurs in one of the small agencies in Anchorage. We moved from another bigger agency because nothing was happening. And we've gone to DVR a couple of times, and I've not been satisfied at all. But it sounds like maybe they've got someone different in there now that's really doing some good work from what you mentioned. It's been a number of years. Anyway, at this point, my son only cleans toilets. And he says he's happy with his work. But again, he's going into the bathroom and spending a half hour to go to the bathroom, which tells me maybe he's a little bored with his work or whatever. And I always looked at supported employment as an opportunity to try and find a variety of things that he could do, not just cleaning the toilets. I think he vacuums too, those two things. So we have a meeting this Friday, and I was going to suggest, is there some way we can look at being more creative? Is there not any way he can be out in the community? Or he's a great kid, no behavior issues at all, but he's essentially nonverbal, especially with people he doesn't know. He has a hard time talking, but he's a good reader. I think he understands things, but that does not mean he will follow through. He does like to just kind of hide and slough off.
Where does he work now?
Hearts and Hands of Care.
So I bash big corporations all the time, but on the other hand, some of them are really geared for people with disabilities. And you're in Anchorage, so have you ever connected with Assets?
We have not asked for their services. I know the people in the printing shop pretty well, but we haven't asked for their services.
Well, I don't know if that might be somewhere to look, and maybe it's a change of job, not just kiddos with disabilities, but neurotypical people get bored with their jobs too, and they change jobs. So, maybe it's looking at different jobs, maybe he could be a stalker at Walmart, or maybe he could be a cart pusher at one of the grocery stores, get him active and out and about, depending on what he wants to do. And that's the thing too, is, giving him options and seeing, okay, which one of these do you like? Does he want to, work with cars? Does he want to work with computers? Even if it's just dusting them? Does he like shredding paper? So it just kind of depends on the person.
And he always, when I ask him, he always says he likes his job. He shredded paper at Hope, but that was the only thing he did. And then he was in a tiny room all by himself. And that was not okay with me.
Are there any things in, I don't know, anywhere in Alaska, any of the major cities though? Because I know here in Denver, we have several organizations that really just specifically employ people with disabilities. There are coffee shops and little pizza breweries and ice cream places and stuff like that. Is that a thing? And if so, where are the best places to try to help folks find those opportunities?
The only one I'm aware of is Assets. They have a printing shop and they do hire a few people. And that's the only place I'm aware of.
It's funny, speaking of pizza, now I'm really hungry. We could, maybe reach out to, Moose's Tooth and Bear something.
Well, Beartooth is there. That's a little pub in a movie theater.
So maybe you could approach them through DVR about, maybe he could be a runner with food, or maybe he could be someone who cleans up, the areas or takes tickets, or, at the movie theaters, something like that. I know here in Fairbanks, where I'm from, we always have people with disabilities working at the theater, whether it's, sweeping up the floors or cleaning out the party room or taking the tickets. So that might be somewhere to look and see if there's something else maybe that he enjoys doing. And when I was talking earlier about the pre-ed stuff, there was that link for the Picture This. That is actually an interest inventory you can actually look at and go through with him and kind of get yes nos on what kind of things he likes and doesn't like, and that might inform the choices a little bit better too.
Okay, and what is that in? I'm sorry.
On the slide that said pre-employment services for DVR. Yeah. The one that's underlined, it's called Picture This, and you can actually link into that page and you can go through that interest inventory with your kiddo. And, because he's learning and growing, even though he's out of school and, he's maturing. So maybe his interests have changed, or maybe there's something more he could do depending on what he's interested in. And that might inform some of your choices.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent idea, to show him ideas. And I find that where?
That is on the slide that talks about the pre-employment services by DVR. It's the underlined one, and it's called Picture This.
Oh, and I'll get that right away. Our meeting is Friday.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And I'll just show you, since I have you guys here, I do have 2 slides of resources, everything from the SSG website, which is just chock full of information. I've got videos on here for Parent Learning Hour, for past transition series recordings. I've got the new updated guardianship and conservator site. So after the state of Alaska websites were hacked a couple of years ago, they did this huge new update to the guardianship and conservator website for the state of Alaska, and it's much more helpful now. It's easier to read, it's step by step, and they even have a phone helpline. So it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And then we have webinars on guardianships and SDMAs. And then one of the things that's kind of important for kiddos who are from traditional Alaskan families or Alaska Native, there has been a curriculum that has been built by a lady named Rain Vandenberg here in Alaska in cooperation with CISA, which is the Special Education Service Agency here in Alaska. And these transition curriculums are based on Alaska Native areas. So they have things like beading and hunting, being outside, being in the water, how to do that safely. So this is also a curriculum that is accessible for parents and educators. And then I did, of course, put the ASQ developmental screening test website for that link to help me grow. And then I do have, because I always get asked questions about guardianship, I wanted to make it really clear. Here's all the information you need in order to get in touch, so that if you do need help, you can find that.
They are wonderful about answering the phone right away and always being helpful. And in your saying ASQ reminded me, I might have misunderstood your sentence when you initially said ASQ, that it was done or available through
Help Me Grow.
Yeah, Help Me Grow. But the infant learning programs, at least here in Eagle River, also does that with families.
Yep, they do. If you wanted to do it like before, like kind of like looking at the milestones to kind of see if maybe you do need to talk to your pediatrician, you can do it for free at the Help Me Grow website.
Yeah, I think you can through ILP website too. But does Help Me Grow, do they actually talk to you and support you through it?
They can, if you would like some more information and support, or you can get referred to the local ILP. There are several around the state. I think the number is at, if I remember correctly, 14 ILPs around the state. So you can actually contact your local one.
I used to work with ILP for years.
Forgive me. What is ILP?
The infant learning or early intervention programs.
Thank you. I know EI. ILP is a new one for me. Infant learning program. Got it.
Sorry.
Yep. There's lots of acronyms, and from state to state, they can be even more different.
Right.
Well, do you guys have any more questions? Any other things I can help with?
I think that's it for me.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you again for coming. I love teaching, love training, love doing stuff like this. And I will send out a follow-up with the slide deck, so you'll have access to all of the links and resources. And if you do need anything else, you can always reach out to me via email, and you'll have that address as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is really helpful for me.